To talk about these tariffs is Charles Hankla. He joins me from Atlanta. He's an associate professor of political science at Georgia State University. Professor, two economic superpowers slapping the biggest round of tariffs on one another's imports. How concerned are you? How much worse is it going to get? And what are the global implications here?
Well, three excellent questions. I think that anyone who tells you that they know exactly what's going to happen going forward is probably being too optimistic. I think there are various scenarios that could occur. One is that China might decide to de-escalate, recognizing the important interdependent economic relationship between the U.S. and China, which has been fostered in the last couple of decades. But another possibility is that China will retaliate more than it has been and might actually escalate the confrontation. But probably if that were to occur, it would start moving outside of the trade arena. And I think that a move of this confrontation outside of the trade arena strictly is what we need to worry about. As long as it's confined to a tariff confrontation, there's only so far it can go because there are only so many goods traded between the United States and China. And as your commentator mentioned earlier, nearly half of those goods are already under tariff. And so there are limits there. But if this escalates outside the trade arena into other economic issues, such as in the financial system, foreign investment, or even outside the economic arena into more security issues, that's where we would, I think, start to need to be concerned about the future of the relationship.
President Trump has repeatedly said this is actually good for the U.S. economy and that it will lead to more American jobs here. Is there any evidence of that, Professor?
Well, I think that most economists would say that trade protection, certainly in the short run, is not good for the economy. There's 200 years of evidence indicating that trade protection actually has a detrimental effect both on the country that is putting up the barriers and on the country that's the recipient of the barriers. And I think we're already seeing in the U.S. That the trade barriers are producing some harm. For example, among farmers, soybean farmers in particular, who have lost some of their market share in China. And I think on the Chinese side, there's now evidence that some American companies are reconsidering, and even non-American companies, which export to the United States, are reconsidering their placement in China. So I think in the short run, at least, it's a job killer. Now, in the long run, there might be some theoretical reasons, at least, to think that strengthening certain domestic American industries that might have moved jobs abroad might be good for keeping at least particular classes of jobs in the United States. But once you start protecting jobs with trade barriers, you start sort of creating incentives for the economy not to evolve and develop in the direction where it's most competitive. And in the long run, that also tends to have very detrimental impacts. So,
and up until now, Professor, consumers have been, for the most part, spared. They haven't really felt the pain. Is that now going to change?
I think so, yes. So before we had tariffs on $50 billion of products, actually somewhat more than $50 billion of products, because there were the earlier steel and aluminum tariffs and the tariffs on solar panels and washing machines. But now we're adding another $200 billion to that number, which altogether constitutes about half of trade. And over time, it hasn't been discussed as much, but today the 10% tariffs are going into effect, but by January they're supposed to go up to 25%. Given that the average U.S. tariff rate is only between 4 and 5%, possibly even less depending on how calculated, this is quite significant. And so I do expect that American consumers will start to feel the pinch of this.
All right, we'll have to leave it there. Charles Hankla joining us from my home state of Atlanta, Georgia. Thank you.